What if the moment you've worked for your whole life, retirement, happens just as the stock market collapses? Would your plan survive, or would you be forced to go back to work? Today we're going to explore how you can stress test your plan to make sure that you stay on track, and also go over what steps you can take today to protect yourself from a stock market collapse ruining your retirement. The fear of retiring into a down market is all too common and can paralyze many would-be retirees into working longer, thus delaying their retirement just in case. Now, there's no denying that a sudden downturn in markets as your retirement is going to lead to some negative financial consequences. However, let's explore how you can prepare and protect your retirement in the event of this worst-case scenario. Alright, so let's start by preparing. Eric wants to retire, but he considers himself to be extremely unlucky when making these types of decisions. He's concerned that as soon as he retires, the stock market's going to go through a correction, thus putting his retirement plan in jeopardy. In his opinion, the market has had a good couple of years in a row here, so it's due for a correction at any point in time. While Eric's concerns are understandable, a well-structured plan should be able to account for worst-case scenarios. Let's take a closer look at Eric's situation to see how his plan stands up to a stress test. Eric is 65 today and already receiving his CPP and OAS. To live his ideal retirement, he would like $7,000 per month in his pocket to spend, and he would like this amount to go up every year by inflation. So in the plan that we're going to look at, the inflation rate that we're using is 3%. Eric is aware of the go-go, slow-go, and no-go stages of retirement, but he wanted to be able to spend as much as he could for as long as he could, and that's why we're using $7,000 per month throughout his plan. He also owned his own home, and he figured he'd eventually sell it around age 85, as it would become too difficult to maintain. As for his retirement accounts, he had $200,000 in his TFSA, $1 million in an RSP, and $350,000 in his non-registered account. Now, throughout the plan, we're using a rate of return of 6.07%. Based on these assumptions, Eric's plan looked great. His home would continue appreciating over time until it was sold at age 85, and over that same period, we would melt down his RSPs so that he wouldn't be left with a huge estate tax bill. His TFSA would continue growing over time, and contributions would be made from his non-registered account. Now, we're not going to go over all the nitty-gritty details of this plan, but safe to say that Eric was in a good position. His plan was over 150% funded, and he'd be leaving a net estate after tax of $2.2 million. But what if Eric's worst fears come true? What if the market crashes as soon as he retires? How would his plan hold up? The 2008 financial crisis was the largest market crash that investors today have lived through. The Canadian stock market reached an all-time high on June 17, 2008, and a few months later, on March 3, 2009, the Canadian stock market was down 48%. In just a few months, the Canadian stock market was essentially cut in half. The Canadian market recovered 2 years later, but soon went through another correction, so not fully recovering until October 2013. From June 17, 2008 until it recovered, there was a time period of about 5.5 years. Now, to stress test Eric's plan, we're not going to assume a 50% drop in his portfolio like the global financial crisis, because he isn't invested 100% in the stock market. In his portfolio, he also has other investments that are not tied to the market. So let's say, for the sake of this example, that Eric's portfolio could drop 30%, and just to be extra conservative, let's say that it would take 6 years for his portfolio to recover. With these assumptions, we can see the value of Eric's portfolio dropping significantly, but he is still 133% funded for retirement. Even when faced with a severe drop in the market, Eric's plan is still on track. Let's take things even a step further to give Eric more reassurance. As previously mentioned, we're using a rate of inflation of 3%. So every year, Eric's expenses of $7,000 per month will increase by 3% to keep up with the cost of living. Now let's say that inflation is actually 4%, so a percent higher than we were expecting. Now, using this assumption, and also that the market's going to go down 30%, Eric's plan is still 115% funded, so he's still on track. Let's also assume that our long-term rate of return isn't 6.07%, but actually 0.5% less. Now, even with this assumption, we're still 110% funded for retirement. By building out a scenario where Eric's plan had terrible market timing, our rate of inflation was off by 1%, and our rate of return was off by 0.5%, he was still on track. This gave him the confidence he needed to pull the plug and retire today. So if you're thinking of retiring and you're getting concerned about what's going to happen in the stock market, make sure to stress test your portfolio to give you that peace of mind whether or not you're going to be okay. Now you might be saying to yourself, this investing thing looks pretty scary. But let's not forget that we painted a pretty dark picture here. So let's say that Eric decided, I don't want to do any of this. What if I just put my money in GICs instead, because I don't want to deal with any market fluctuations? Now, Eric is right. By putting all his money in GICs, he's not going to have to deal with any market fluctuations, but he's introducing a new risk to his plan. After factoring in inflation and taxes, GIC returns often end up negative. So if Eric put his entire portfolio in GICs today, his retirement outlook drops to 96%. Ironically, avoiding the market introduces a bigger risk, the erosion of Eric's purchasing power over time due to inflation. A well-structured, balanced approach remains the best defense against financial risks. Now, how can we protect Eric's plans to mitigate the effects of a sudden crash? The problem with retiring into a down market is that you're withdrawing from investments that are down in value. You are selling at a reduced value, but also reducing the base on which future growth depends. To protect yourself, you can adopt the bucketing strategy. If you want the in-depth version of this strategy, check out this video. But to quickly summarize, the bucketing strategy divides your retirement savings into 3 buckets. Your short-term bucket would hold cash-like investments for immediate expenses. Your mid-term bucket would hold conservative investments for, let's say, years 3 to 10 of your retirement. And then your long-term bucket would hold your stock or growth investments that you're not going to need to touch for many years. This structure allows you to cover off your expenses for a good 10-year stretch before you even have to touch your long-term growth investments. So even if there is another financial crisis type event and it takes, let's say, 6 years for the market to recover, Eric's not going to be selling anything at a loss because those investments are held in his long-term bucket, which he won't even need to touch for 10 years. If you want to make sure that your plan is stress tested for retirement, check us out at transcanadawealth.com.